Hi, my name is Sofie. I'm a professional doll maker. Recently I did a very special commission, a doll based on the lead vocalist of Led Zeppelin and the legendary hard rock star Robert Plant. Today I will show you how I recreated Robert's iconic look and carved a one-of-a-kind face right from the raw porcelain. I enjoyed this project so much that I am looking for a character to create next time, so watch till the end if you want to participate. But now, let's begin to create. To start working on a porcelain doll, I prepared the porcelain slip by straining it to get rid of bubbles. This slip is going to be casted in the plaster molds I made in one of my previous videos. As you can see, the inside of the molds replicates the shape of the parts of the future doll. When the porcelain slip is casted, it hardens on the surface of the molds and takes its shape, so I can cast multiple identical pieces. However, this time I am making a unique face, and we'll get to that very soon. Before the molds are ready for the casting process, I clean them up and secure the parts with rubber bands. Now I can start casting. I carefully poured the porcelain slip into the molds, making sure the stream is even. I have to be quite quick with pouring. If I'm too slow, the slip starts to harden as I pour and creates lines on the cast that look somewhat like rings on a tree trunk. I poured the slip into every mold until all the parts of the doll were casted. Then I left the slip inside the molds for a bit to let it harden, and poured the excess slip back to the container. This is why the parts are hollow on the inside. When the pieces are casted, I carefully open up the molds and remove the casts. They need quite a bit of cleanup. I cut off the spruce while the pieces are still wet. But wait, the face I casted is not even close to what I'm going to make. Let's take the cast from the mold and fix that. I made this face cast just so I have some ground to build on. I'm going to basically remove all the features of this face and create a new sculpt that resembles the star of today's video, Robert. To do this, I prepared some thick porcelain slip. To perform this plastic surgery, I applied a thick layer of slip to the cast, strategically adding volume where I need it. For example, I can already tell that I need a higher nose bridge and a bigger chin for the sculpt I'm making. It is very important to apply additional porcelain while the cast is still wet, so the layers fuse together and won't crack. And this is what I ended up with. You might ask, why I made a doll version of a blobfish instead of Robert's plant, but trust me, I am going to make something cool out of it very soon. In fact, if you look closely, all the parts of the doll look pretty rough at this point. You can see these obnoxious seam lines and uneven surface, so let's make a quick sanding break and fix that. I remove the seam lines and sand all the parts. Before the porcelain is fired in the kiln, it is very soft and fragile, so I make sure I don't flatten all the details. I find it much easier to do with sanding sponges rather than sandpaper. When all the pieces are nice and smooth, let's return to our blob face and try to turn it into the most attractive rock singer. First of all, I carefully removed any unevenness and brush strokes with a small tool. As I said, the raw porcelain is soft and malleable, so I can carve into it and create the desired sculpt. When our base is smooth and even, I move on to the features. I carve the lips with a slight green, refine the chin, and added the ever-important dimple. Well, not that important. Then it's time for the nose. I carved in the nostrils and refined the tip. Last but certainly not least, I worked on the eyes. I am not going for 100% accuracy and keep my own doll-like style, so the eyes are quite big, but I am recreating the shape of the eyes so the face is still recognizable. I carved the eyes with a needle and then added the upper and lower eyelids. I digressed from the face for a moment to work on the ears. They also need a bit of carving to add definition. The last detail is some final work on the lips. I added a tiny raised line on the contour of the lips and carved tiny wrinkles. This is the final result. I think the sculpt turned out great. The face definitely resembles Robert's plant, but it also matches my style and it won't look alien on the doll's body. The other components of the look will make the resemblance even stronger. But before I can move on to that, let's finish the body. The last thing to do is to add definition to hands and feet. These parts have the most of details, probably even more than the face, and all these details cannot be transferred with a plaster mold. Every time I make a doll, I work on each tiny hand and foot individually. I separated the fingers, then moved on to adding details to the palms. Then I carved tiny nails on each finger. And last, created tiny wrinkles on the knuckles and palms. Here is the finished tiny hands for tiny Robert. The feet require the same work. I separated the toes and added definition to the soles. Then I carved the toenails and wrinkles on the toes and soles. Finally, all the pieces are sanded and refined, and we can move on to the much hotter step. It's time to fire the doll. The doll is fired in the kiln not once, but 2 times. Firstly, I am doing something called soft fire, which means the temperature in the kiln is high enough to strengthen the pieces, but not too high, so the porcelain stays porous and a bit malleable. This is done so I can wet sand the pieces to remove any scratches that might be left from the dry sanding. For the porcelain that I use, the temperature for soft fire is 1000 degrees Celsius. Now I can place the pieces in water and let them soak. If I did this to the raw pieces, they would just dissolve and turn back into the slip, but now they stay solid and I can polish them to perfection. When the pieces are smooth and dry, it's time for even higher temperatures. I place the pieces on the bed of silica sand. This will prevent them from deforming at the high temperature and sticking to the kiln shelf. I place the shelf onto the kiln and prepare it for the hard fire. I set the program, and within the next 12 hours, the kiln slowly heats up to 1220 C. The heat is so intense that the inside of the kiln looks like burning inferno, but this temperature is required for the magic to happen. Next day, when the kiln cooled down, I can take the shelf with our future doll out. Porcelain shrinks and melts, completely changing its looks, properties and even color. Finally, the porcelain looks like it's supposed to. It is solid, smooth, translucent and absolutely beautiful. I've been working with porcelain for well over a decade, and I'm still learning new tricks and techniques. And as someone who is always in the market to learn a new skill, I am glad to introduce you to the sponsor of today's video, Skillshare. Skillshare is the largest online learning community for creatives with thousands of classes to spark your inspiration. Lately, I've been really getting into drawing, and I was excited to discover Brent Everston's Build Your Foundation in Figure Drawing classes. Understanding anatomy and the dynamics of the human body is crucial for a doll maker, and I had a blast working on a skill I need for my job, but also having some me time and enjoying the experience. Skillshare set up these drawing classes as a learning path, where they have multiple classes meant to be taken in order, so starting on a new skill is a lot less intimidating. And it's not just drawing, they have an array of classes in so many categories. For instance, sewing, cooking, photography, or even singing, like the Complete Singing Learning Path by Denise Carrett and Neka Hamilton. I think I know what I am going to tackle next. So, if you want to try something new and explore your creativity, you can try Skillshare for free using my link in the description. The first 500 people to use my link will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Thank you Skillshare for sponsoring this video, and let's get back to the project. When the porcelain doll is fired, all that is left is to clean up the pieces from sand residue and enjoy the beautiful set of parts. Oh yes, that's nice. Nothing else to desire. Unless maybe a bit of color? I don't remember Robert's plan being this pale and browless, so let's paint the doll. For painting, I use China paints. These paints are designed specifically for porcelain. They are fired in the kiln at about 800 C, which binds them to the surface at the molecular level. This means that the paints will never scratch off or even fade. I am working in layers, building the color and the detail step by step, and fire each layer to fix it. First of all, I added shading with brown paints to the face. I am almost dry brushing the paints to feather it out as softly as possible. Then I painted the whites of the eyes and outlined the eyebrows. For now, I am just setting the shape of the eyebrows, trying to replicate Robert's facial expression. All the hairs and definition comes in later. Then it's time for the red paint. I outlined the waterline of the eyes, added color to the lips, and then applied the blush not only to the cheeks, but to all the areas of the face that are rosier, like nose, chin and ears. Next layer I am back to the eyes and eyebrows. I painted the base for the irises with blue paint, then switched to the thinnest brush and started to paint the hairs on the eyebrows. I like to paint the eyebrows gradually, layer by layer. As you can see, I am adding more and more definition to the eyebrows and eyes, making sure that the shape is correct for our character. With the same thin brush, I painted tiny strokes on the lips to add depth and emphasize the shape. Then it's time for the eyelashes. I am keeping the lashes tamed not to go overboard, but Robert has lashes too, so I painted them and spent quite a bit of time to achieve this soft but defined look. Then I painted the pupils and added shading to the irises. A bit more definition to the eyebrows and lips. Now, when the face is almost painted, it is time for a small touch that truly pulls the look together. The highlights. I outlined the eyes and lips with glossy white paint. Added tiny white strokes to the lips. And finally, painted sparkles in the eyes to make the gaze more captivating. I think that's required for this project. Here is the finished result. I also painted a few freckles and birthmarks off camera to make the face more realistic. I personally love this middle ground between realism and dollishness. When the face is finished, let's move on to the body. Hands and feet require the most work, so that's the body part I paint first. I applied rosy paints to the fingers and feathered out, defining the knuckles. Then the same is done to the palms, to make them a bit pinker, as they usually are. The feet are painted the same way. I applied blush to the toes and soles and blended it out. Then I painted the nails. The rosy paints look vivid now, but it gets more muted when it's fired, so the nails look natural in the end. Now it's time for the tiniest details. I took my trusty thin brush and painted over every wrinkle to add shading and make them more defined. Last, I painted the white areas on the fingernails and toenails. Hands and feet for robots are done. But not only hands and feet get the paint job. The rest of the body gets some shading as well. I dry brushed the same brown paint I used on the face to all the recessed areas to add a bit more depth to the sculpt. Then I switched for the rosy paints and applied blush to all the necessary areas to make the porcelain look more like human skin. Last, I painted freckles and birthmarks all over the body. I think those tiny imperfections are something that truly makes the doll look like a real person. When the painting is done, we can finally assemble Robert and see how he looks. But before I can put the doll together, I have to do a few more things. First of all, I put a bit of epoxy sculpt into some of the joints. This will protect the porcelain in places that get the most pressure. Then I cut a stainless steel wire and put it inside every joint. The wire redistributes the tension inside the joints and help it move smoother. I cut the wire to size of every joint, then fix it with a drop of glue. The wire and hands, feet and head serve an extra purpose. The doll is assembled with an elastic cord, and this cord is fixing the limbs and head with tiny hooks. As you can see, one side of the hook is attached to the wire bar inside the hands, and the other side to the elastic. When the doll is assembled, the hooks will hold the elastic from both sides in slight tension. Now I can line the joints. Porcelain should not be rubbed against porcelain, that's the sure way to crack it. In human body, our joints are protected with cartilage, but for a doll a layer of suede would do just fine. For bigger joints, I glued down small strips of suede, cutting dots when needed. For smaller joints, I attached the lining in full piece, then cut the excess off. Finally, everything is prepared and we can proceed to assembling. I first put the elastics in the chest piece and attached the head with a hook, as I shown before. Next, I slid the pieces one by one onto the elastic. Each leg has its own elastic. Its other end is attached to the foot with another hook. When the body was assembled, I moved to the arms. One elastic cord runs through both arms from hand to hand and through the chest. The hands are attached the same way as the feet, and we are done! Our Robert is put together, and now he can move. Our base is built up, and now I move on to the most exciting part – creating the wig and the costume for the iconic look of Robert's plans. First, let's address the hair. I am making a removable wig on a hot glue cup, and I started by wrapping a head template with a piece of cloth. I covered it with hot glue to create a flexible cup, then cut it to size. The mark on the top of the head is where the parting will be. When the cup is ready, I started to attach the hair lock by lock. I used the tip of my glue gun to implant the hair into the cup by remelting the glue. For this project, I used the mohair with a quite firm texture so it holds all the styling that I will be doing later, and I dyed it a nice golden blonde color off camera. I kept attaching hair in rows, moving from bottom to the top. In the front of the wig, I used very small locks, making sure that the hairline is nice and tidy. When I reached the top of the head, I took the wig off from the template and cut an opening for the future parting. I fed a long strip of hair through this opening, secured it from the inside with more hot glue, and placed it onto the template while the glue was still hot, so it took the correct shape. Now all I need to do is to divide this lock in two parts, and we got ourselves a perfect parting. To set it in place, I wet the hair, put a piece of cloth on top and let it dry like this. As the last touch, I covered the inside of the wig to make it look nicer. The wig is put together, but that's not what we are looking for yet. To replicate Robert's mane, it requires for quite a lot of styling. I wish I knew if that's his real hair texture, or if he styles it to make my life harder. First of all, I trimmed the hair to create layers, especially around the face. Then it's time to curl. The tool I'm using is in fact a soldering iron that I modified so it doesn't get very hot. Please do not use a standard soldering iron for curling doll's hair. It will set your wig on fire. Lock by lock, I styled the entire wig. As the final touch, I curled a few tiny locks in the front to frame the face. Cute! And here is the finished wig. I fluffed it up slightly, so it looks less like an 18th century hairdo and more like a hard rock mane. And I think the result is just right. This is my first time styling a wig like this, and I am very happy with the result. When I'm done with the hair, let's create the outfit. I reflected for a while on what exactly I wanted to make. I searched my fabric stash for inspiration, and look what a beauty I found! This is silk fabric with magnificent ethnic prints, very fine and high quality. and I believe it's perfect for a project. I prepared a pattern and traced it on the fabric, paying attention to the prints. I am using the nicest parts of the fabric for this shirt, and I am making sure that the print is symmetrical. When I'm happy with the placement, I cut out the pieces. In my previous projects, I created quite loose and flowy shirts, but this one is going to be much more fitted. I put the pieces together, starting with the shoulder seam. I pinned the seams and then basted them to be extra precise. Then I sew the seam on the machine. Next, I am attaching the sleeves. This seam is curved, so it's not only much more difficult to attach, but also I can't use the sewing machine. Instead, I carefully hand-sewn the sleeve to the shoulder. When the sleeve is attached, I sew the entire side seam, from the cuff to the hem. Most of the shirt is done. All that is left is to attach the collar and the cuffs that I prepared off camera. I am carefully stitching these pieces by hand. Now it's time to address the hem. It is curved, so to create the desired shape, I am pinning the hem with a disturbing amount of pins. Before the shirt turned into pinhead, I quickly basted the hem to secure the shape and then attached it with adhesive tape. The finished hem is super neat, without any unnecessary bulk. Last, I attached the buttons and loops to the front. I am using buttons and threads that match the fabric. And the cuffs get their own set of buttons and loops as well. All of this is incredibly important, considering that it seems like Robert didn't know how to use buttons in the days of his youth. But you know, I like when the things are done properly. And the shirt is done. I can button it up, but I just leave it like this. Now let's move on to the pants. Following the fashion of the late 60s and early 70s, I am making a pair of iconic bell bottoms. I traced the pattern on the dark brown cotton and cut it out. Now I am going to stitch together the inner side seams. To do so, I follow my usual method. Pin the pieces, baste them together, and sew on the machine. Next, I ironed the seams flat and moved on to the crotch seam. When I pin the pant legs together, I pay extra attention to the placement of the side seams and make sure that they are perfectly aligned. Again, I basted the seam. This time it's especially important, as I have to be very precise, and sew the seam on the machine. This seam is curved, so I am sewing very slowly, carefully following the marks on the fabric. When the crotch seam is done, I flip the soon-to-be pants and repeat the same steps on the outer side seams. The pants are almost done. All that is left is to attach the waistband and hem the bottom. I am doing both of these things very carefully by hand. The last step is to attach a button and a loop, and the pants are done. For the shoes, I am using this pair of leather boots I made in the past. When you are a doll maker, you just have a couple of these things in your drawer. I just added extra pizzazz with a touch of weathering. I think it's quite fitting for this look. I believe we can't imagine Robert without a couple of accessories, so let's make some. First of all, I made a nice little belt with a silver buckle. I am using the same leather I used for the shoes, so everything matches. And last, but certainly not least, let's complete this look with some jewelry. I created a necklace and a couple of bracelets out of very fine beads, matching the color scheme of the shirt. And finally, all the work is done, and it is time for the reveal. Unfortunately, due to copyright, I cannot play Led Zeppelin music here, but I sure let the doll listen to the good old classic rock. I think Porcelain Robert enjoyed it and got into the groove. Ah, if only he could sing. Now it's time for you to pick the next project. I absolutely enjoyed making a doll based on an existing person. And if you enjoyed it as well, please let me know in the comments who I should make next. I will be creating a doll based on the most popular idea in one of my next videos. It could be absolutely anyone, male or female, a real person or a character, so don't limit yourself. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe. That would help this channel very much. If you want to find out more about my dolls, please go to my website sofiedolls.com. All my social media links are in description. And please let me know how do you think Robert turned out. I am very excited to know your opinion. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and see you next time.